It began in silence, the kind of silence that lives in the forest long after the last echo of war has faded. In the southern reaches of Poland, beneath the thick canopy of the Owl Mountains, local villagers began to notice strange things. Hollow echoes that came from the ground, entrances sealed with rusted steel, concrete walls where no one remembered them being built. It was the late 1940s, and Poland was still recovering from the devastation of the Second World War. Entire towns were rebuilding, graves were being dug, and ruins were being catalogued. But in this quiet corner of Lower Silesia, the land itself seemed to be hiding something. One morning, a farmer walking through the woods near Walim struck metal with his shovel. The sound was unnatural, hollow, deep. Beneath the layer of moss and dirt, he uncovered a steel door embedded directly into the mountainside. There were no markings, no signs, only a faded red symbol that time had almost erased. He reported it to the local authorities, who at first dismissed it as remnants of an old mine. But when engineers arrived days later and managed to open the door, what they found sent a chill through the air. Behind that entrance was a long, cold tunnel, perfectly cut through solid rock, extending far beyond the reach of their flashlights. It wasn't a mine, it was something else. Within weeks, more entrances began to surface across the region, near the villages of Osovka, Włodarz, Rzeczka, and Jugovic. Each led into vast underground complexes connected by winding tunnels. Walls of reinforced concrete, some over a meter thick. Corridors large enough for trucks to pass through. Ventilation shafts, electrical conduits, evidence of sophisticated planning. The locals had stumbled upon Project Riese, Giant in German, one of Nazi Germany's most secret and ambitious construction projects. No records survived in full. No blueprints were ever found intact. What little was recovered came from fragments, testimonies, scattered documents, and whispered rumors from those who had worked there. But what historians later pieced together painted a haunting picture. Construction began sometime in 1943, when the war had begun turning against Germany. The Allied bombing campaign was devastating the Reich's industrial centers. Entire factories were reduced to rubble. Hitler's generals realized that to continue fighting, Germany needed production facilities that couldn't be bombed, hidden, protected, and deep underground. So, in the Owl Mountains, they began to dig. Under the supervision of Organization Todt, the same engineering corps that built the Atlantic Wall and the Siegfried Line, thousands of forced laborers from concentration camps were brought to the site. They were prisoners from Grossrosen, political captives, Jews, and resistance members. Men and women whose only tool was survival. They worked in unimaginable conditions. The tunnels were carved by hand with drills, explosives, and primitive machinery. Air was scarce. The temperature stayed near freezing. Many died inside those walls, buried by collapses or executed when they could no longer work. To this day, no one knows exactly how many, but estimates range between 13,000 and 20,000 dead. As the war drew to its close, Project Riese was still incomplete. Massive chambers had been hollowed out, miles of tunnels connected the mountains, but the purpose of it all remained unclear. Some historians believe it was meant to be a vast underground headquarters for Hitler himself, the Führerhauptquartier, a final fortress where he could direct the war in secrecy as Berlin crumbled. Others suggest it was an underground weapons factory, possibly linked to experimental jet technology, or even the rumored Wunderwaffe, the miracle weapons that the Nazis hoped would turn the tide of the war. Yet, no conclusive evidence has ever surfaced. The documents that might have revealed its purpose were destroyed or lost in the chaos of Germany's collapse. When Soviet forces advanced into Poland in early 1945, the Nazis evacuated the area. The entrances were sealed, explosives detonated, and the few surviving laborers were executed. By the time the Red Army reached the mountains, Project Riese had already been buried, both physically and historically, but not forgotten. In the decades that followed, the tunnels became the stuff of legend. Treasure hunters claimed they were filled with stolen gold and art from across Europe. Others whispered about underground laboratories, secret weapons, even hidden trains carrying Nazi riches. What is certain, however, is this: Project Riese existed. It was real, and it was vast. Today, only portions of the tunnels have been mapped. The known complexes, Rzeczka, Osovka, Włodarz, and a handful of smaller sites, stretch across dozens of kilometers. Yet local explorers and historians believe the true network is far larger, extending beneath the mountains in ways we still don't fully understand. Standing inside one of these tunnels today, you can feel it, the weight of the air, the echo of footsteps that no longer exist, the faint smell of damp concrete and iron. It feels less like a ruin and more like a wound that never healed. And the most haunting part, no one knows how deep it goes. By the summer of 1943, Germany's war machine was beginning to crumble, though few in Berlin would admit it. Entire cities lay in ruins. Allied bombers filled the skies, and the once unstoppable Wehrmacht was bleeding out on the Eastern Front. But deep within the Al Mountains, a different kind of war effort was taking shape, one that didn't rely on tanks or planes, but on stone, sweat, and secrecy. It began with a single order from the top of the Reich Chancellery, an order so classified that even senior officers only saw fragments of it. It came from Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and one of the most powerful men in Nazi Germany. Speer's vision was radical, to move the entire war industry underground beyond the reach of Allied bombers. He called it the Untertageverlagerung, the Underground Relocation Program. Project Riese would be one of its crown jewels. The name Riese, meaning giant, was not metaphorical. It reflected the sheer scale of what was planned. Unlike other underground factories such as Mittelwerk in Nordhausen, where the Vi-2 rockets were assembled, Riese wasn't just a manufacturing site. It was conceived as a self-contained underground city, a fortress of concrete and steel that could house thousands, operate independently, and potentially serve as a command center for the Nazi High Command. The construction was overseen by Organization Todt, the engineering corps responsible for some of the Reich's most ambitious structures. Under their authority, convoys of trucks and trains began arriving in Lower Silesia, hauling machinery, steel beams, and cement by the ton. At first, the locals believed the work was for a new railway tunnel or perhaps a mountain depot, but the scale soon betrayed the truth. Entire forests were cleared, roads widened, barracks for thousands of laborers were erected in a matter of weeks. High fences surrounded the sites, guarded by SS units from the nearby Gross-Rosen concentration camp. And then the digging began. The mountains echoed with the relentless thunder of drills, hammers, and controlled detonations. By night, the glow of floodlights illuminated the forest like a second sunrise, while the rhythmic clang of metal never stopped. The workforce was drawn from the Reich's most expendable resource, human lives. Prisoners from Gross-Rosen were transported in open wagons, hundreds at a time. Many were already half-starved, broken from previous labor assignments. They were divided into work details, tunneling crews, concrete mixers, cable layers, all supervised by German engineers and brutal SS guards. Every day began before dawn. Prisoners were marched to the sites under armed escort. They labored 12 to 16 hours, often in freezing conditions, breathing dust and fumes from the explosives that carved through the stone. The air inside the tunnels was thick with smoke and dampness. The sound of collapsing rock was constant. There was no safety equipment, no ventilation, no mercy. Survivor testimonies collected after the war describe a world without sunlight. Men digging until their hands bled, the walls sweating with condensation, the air so thin it burned the lungs. Anyone who collapsed was beaten. Those who couldn't stand were left where they fell. You could hear the drills, but also the coughing, one survivor later said. And when the coughing stopped, it meant someone had died. Food was scarce, watery soup, a crust of bread, and occasionally coffee made from roasted barley. Death came from exhaustion, disease, or a single bullet from a guard's rifle. The bodies were taken out each morning and buried in shallow pits near the forest line. Despite the horror, progress was rapid. By late 1944, the main complexes at Rzeczka, Osowka, Włodarz, Jugowice, Soban, and Gontowa were all under construction. Each consisted of multiple tunnel systems, some reaching depths of over 100 meters. Concrete walls were poured, steel beams installed, electrical wiring embedded. Engineers designed enormous ventilation shafts capable of sustaining underground populations. Narrow-gauge rail lines were laid to transport materials inside. What remains extraordinary is how advanced the engineering was. Even today, parts of Project Riese show precision far ahead of their time. The tunnel cross-sections were standardized. Drainage systems were integrated into the floors. Some corridors were large enough for trucks or even trains. In the Osowka complex, massive chambers were carved, one over 50 meters long, with an arched roof of reinforced concrete so thick it could have withstood a direct bomb hit. Nearby, an unfinished hall features stone pillars that look more like those of an underground cathedral than a military installation. It's here, among these ghostly spaces, that speculation about Riese's true purpose grows. The architectural design suggests more than simple industry. Some chambers appear to have been designed for living quarters, others for command operations, and still others remain inexplicable, vast, empty caverns with no apparent function. Was this the underground headquarters of the Third Reich, Hitler's final command bunker? Some evidence points that way. The proximity of the complex to Schönch Castle, known to have been requisitioned by the Nazis during the war, suggests a direct connection. In fact, tunnels discovered beneath the castle appear to lead toward the mountain systems, hinting at a subterranean link. Documents found after the war indicate that Hitler's personal staff visited the region multiple times between 1943 and 1944. The area was declared a Sperrgebiet, a restricted military zone. No civilians were allowed entry. Even local officials required special permits to travel through. But the construction was racing against time. By late 1944, the front lines were collapsing. The Soviet army was advancing through Eastern Europe faster than anyone predicted. German industry was disintegrating under constant bombardment. Project Riese was consuming enormous resources, manpower, concrete, and fuel, yet it was still incomplete. Albert Speer later claimed in his memoirs that he tried to scale back the project, realizing it could never be finished before Germany's defeat. But Hitler insisted it continue at all costs. "We must think in centuries, not months," he reportedly said. "The Reich will rise again, and it will rise from beneath the earth." It was a delusion, but one that consumed thousands of lives and millions of tons of stone. By early 1945, construction slowed to a crawl. Fuel shortages halted the machines. Explosives were scarce. The SS began executing workers to prevent them from falling into Allied hands. When the Red Army entered the Al Mountains in May, the tunnels were abandoned, the entrances sealed, the records burned. Only the silence remained. The war ended, but Project Riese had barely begun. What was meant to be Hitler's last fortress was instead left as a skeleton, a maze of unfinished corridors buried beneath the mountains. But as post-war investigators would soon discover, not everything inside those tunnels was gone. Some of it had been hidden, and some of it was still waiting to be found. When the war ended, the world wanted answers. But in the ruins of the Third Reich, answers were buried as deep as the tunnels themselves. In May 1945, Soviet forces swept into Lower Silesia. The Nazi war machine had collapsed. Berlin was in ashes. Hitler was dead. But the Owl Mountains were still alive, with something the Soviets didn't fully understand. The first soldiers who entered the area reported sealed tunnels, scorched entrances, and strange machinery half buried under rubble. Many of the access points had been intentionally destroyed, dynamited from within. Others were hidden under landslides, as if nature itself had been forced to conceal them. The Soviets quickly classified the entire region. Maps were confiscated, locals forbidden from entering, and for several years, Project Riese vanished from public knowledge, absorbed into the vast silence of the post-war world. But even the Red Army couldn't ignore what they found. Within months, teams of Soviet engineers began exploring the tunnels, searching for evidence of German technology. What they uncovered inside was both impressive and disturbing. Concrete galleries hundreds of meters long, ventilation systems still intact, traces of electrical wiring, transformer rooms, and rail systems, all buried beneath the earth. But more than that, they found signs that the Nazis had left in a hurry. Abandoned equipment, half-finished structures, crates marked with German military codes, all empty. Whatever had once been stored, there was gone. Some reports, later declassified in fragments, mentioned sealed chambers filled with water and corridors that extended far beyond the mapped areas. One account from a Soviet engineer described reaching a steel door that could not be opened even with explosives. Behind it, he claimed, was a hollow echo, a space so large it distorted sound. Then, abruptly, the Soviet investigation stopped. No official explanation, no final report. The entrances were resealed, the guards withdrawn, and the records disappeared into the archives of Moscow, never to resurface. For years afterward, local Poles spoke of strange activity in the mountains, military trucks at night, the sound of drilling long after the war had ended. Some believed the Soviets had found something and were keeping it secret. By the 1950s, the area was finally reopened to civilians, and that's when the rumors began. Treasure hunters flooded the Owl Mountains, drawn by stories of Nazi gold and hidden trains filled with stolen art. According to legend, in the last days of the war, a German armored train carrying looted treasures from across Europe vanished somewhere between Rockwall and Wallem and was said to have been sealed inside one of the tunnels of Project Riese. No one ever found it, but the myth never died. Through the decades, explorers discovered new sections of the tunnels, collapsed shafts, unexplored corridors, and chambers that seemed to go nowhere. Every find only deepened the mystery. Why build something so massive, so elaborate, and then leave it unfinished? Archaeologists studying the site in the 1970s noted that the concrete used in Riese was of unusually high quality, resistant to time and moisture. Some walls looked almost newly poured. Others bore strange inscriptions, initials, dates, and symbols that have never been fully decoded. And then there were the whispers about things that shouldn't exist. In 1965, a group of amateur cavers claimed to have found a sealed chamber deep inside the Wodars complex. According to their account, the air was thick with oil and metal dust, and the walls were lined with what appeared to be rusted machinery. They swore they saw shapes, mechanical frameworks, cabling, and strange cylindrical objects before being forced to retreat by rising water. The story was dismissed as fantasy, but the description matched something terrifyingly familiar, the kind of industrial layout used for assembling engines, turbines, or weapons. Some historians believe Riese was meant for jet engine production, possibly linked to the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. Others think it was part of Hitler's secret weapons program, the Wunderwaffe, projects so advanced they bordered on science fiction. Rocket prototypes, guided bombs, even rumored atomic research. The deeper the tunnels went, the stranger the possibilities became. Then, in the 1990s, after the fall of the Soviet Union, new information began to surface. Declassified Polish military documents confirmed that Soviet engineers had indeed explored Riese extensively between 1945 and 1947. They removed machinery, power generators, and crates of technical blueprints. The documents mentioned devices of unknown function and noted that some sections were deemed unsafe due to residual radiation. Radiation. That one word changed everything. Historians rushed to explain it. Perhaps it was just contaminated soil from wartime munitions or industrial materials like thorium, but others weren't convinced. Some began to suggest that Project Riese may have been tied to Germany's nuclear ambitions, the long-rumored attempt to develop an atomic weapon during the war. There is no definitive proof of that. No bomb, no reactor, no documentation linking Riese to atomic research. But the fragments we do have, the sealed chambers, the radiation reports, and the missing Soviet files, continue to fuel the speculation. Today, walking through one of the open tunnels, you can feel that weight. The walls, slick with moisture, still smell faintly of oil and rust. Drops of water echo through the empty halls like a ticking clock. And as you walk deeper, the air grows colder, heavier, as if the mountain itself remembers. Guides often say that the silence in Riese isn't quiet, it hums, a low, constant vibration that seems to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Some say it's just the air. Others think it's the ghosts of the men who built it, still digging somewhere in the dark. In the last 70 years, hundreds of explorers, archaeologists, and journalists have tried to uncover the full story of Project Riese. None have succeeded. The blueprints remain missing. The Soviet archives remain sealed. And the mountains, patient, timeless, keep their secrets. One thing is certain. Riese was never just a construction project. It was a statement of power, of desperation, and of a vision so vast it outlived the men who imagined it. But the mystery doesn't end here. Because what was hidden in those tunnels may not have been just weapons or bunkers. Some believe it was something more, a symbol of the Reich's obsession with control, science, and the occult. In the next chapter, we descend further into that world. The rumors of ancient artifacts, lost knowledge, and Nazi experiments that blur the line between myth and history. This is where the story of Riese turns from engineering into obsession. By 1944, the Nazi war effort was collapsing, yet deep underground in the hidden chambers of Project Riese, the work continued. It no longer seemed purely military. The engineering was too intricate, the secrecy too absolute. Even for a regime built on control, something about Riese felt different, like it was serving not just strategy, but belief. To understand why, you have to look at the strange obsession that gripped parts of the Nazi elite, an obsession with the mystical, the ancient, and the occult. This wasn't myth or rumor. It was fact. The Nazi leadership had entire departments devoted to it. The most notorious was the Ananba, founded by Heinrich Himmler in 1935. Officially, it was an institute for cultural research, studying Germanic history and heritage. In reality, it was a hybrid of archaeology, pseudoscience, and mysticism, tasked with proving the racial and mythological superiority of the so-called Aryan people. The Ananba sent expeditions across the world, from Tibet to the Arctic, in search of evidence of an ancient, advanced civilization that predated all others. They hunted for sacred relics, ancient texts, and lost technologies. They believed that somewhere in humanity's forgotten past lay the origins of power, a power that could be harnessed again. And when the war began to turn against them, those beliefs became desperation. By late 1943, Himmler's organization had started moving research operations underground, away from Allied bombers. Dozens of secret laboratories were established in mines and bunkers. Some of those sites are known, others remain undocumented. But several researchers have suggested that Project Riese may have hosted more than engineers and laborers. That deep beneath the mountains, something else was happening. Among the testimonies collected after the war are reports from Polish locals who claim to have seen strange crates being delivered at night, marked not with the usual military codes but with arcane symbols. Others recalled SS officers in black uniforms arriving by convoy, staying only briefly, then disappearing into the tunnels. When Soviet investigators entered the complex in 1945, they allegedly found storage rooms filled with geological samples, ancient maps, and documents written in Gothic script. Some were labeled Ananba. Those items vanished into Soviet custody and have never been seen again. Historians debate what this means. Was Project Riese connected to the Nazi occult movement, or was it simply another industrial complex that happened to share geography with their myths? The line between fact and legend blurs here. In post-war interviews, members of the Ananba spoke openly about their belief in the Vril, a supposed source of cosmic energy, described in 19th century fiction but adopted by Nazi mystics as something real. They believed Vril was the life force that powered the universe, and that ancient civilizations, perhaps in Atlantis or Hyperborea, had once harnessed it. Himmler, fascinated by these ideas, dreamed of rediscovering that lost energy, believing it could grant ultimate power. He surrounded himself with astrologers, runologists, and occult scientists. His SS castle at Wewelsburg, shaped like a spearhead, was designed as a temple to this belief system, complete with a hall of the dead where SS officers were to be honored like medieval knights. It sounds absurd now, almost cinematic, but to the men who commanded millions, it was deadly serious. They saw themselves as the heirs to an ancient order and their war as a cosmic struggle. So when rumors began to spread that Project Riese had been linked to these ideas, it didn't seem impossible. The tunnels themselves seem almost ceremonial in places. Massive stone chambers shaped like vaults, perfect geometric corridors that serve no practical military purpose, patterns carved into walls that some claim resemble runic symbols. At Osovka, one section is nicknamed the Cathedral, an enormous hall with towering columns, its purpose completely unknown. Another chamber features a wide concrete platform aligned precisely east to west, as if meant for some kind of ritual or presentation. Could these be remnants of construction design? Yes. But could they also have been intended for something symbolic? That's the question that has haunted historians for decades. In 2011, Polish archaeologists scanning parts of Riese with ground-penetrating radar detected voids, vast empty spaces deeper than any mapped tunnels. Some of them were perfectly symmetrical, almost architectural in layout. But excavation was impossible. The tunnels are unstable, flooded, and in some places, sealed by explosions. Whatever lies beneath remains untouched, a labyrinth beneath a labyrinth. Among locals, there's a darker legend that toward the end of the war, the SS conducted experiments in Riese. Not on weapons, but on people. Whispers tell of prisoners taken into the tunnels and never seen again, of lights and sounds at night, of screams that echoed from deep within the mountains. There is no hard evidence for this, no documents, no photographs. But the testimonies are consistent, enough to keep the stories alive. What's certain is this. The SS viewed human life as expendable, and in their pursuit of control, whether scientific, military, or spiritual, they were willing to sacrifice anything. When the Soviets arrived, the SS had already destroyed most traces of whatever they were doing underground. But a few reports mention finding lead-lined rooms, unusual electrical wiring, and what may have been chemical storage tanks. No one has been able to confirm what they were used for. To this day, the Polish government classifies parts of Riese as restricted due to unknown hazards. Researchers who have explored the sealed sections speak of strange magnetic interference, sudden malfunctions of lights and cameras, and, most mysteriously, patches of ground that register minor radiation. It could all have logical explanations, remnants of wartime industry. But combined with the legends of the Ananba, the timing, and the sheer scale of secrecy, the story of Riese begins to feel like something more than a military project. Perhaps it was a convergence of engineering, ideology, and obsession, a place where science met superstition, where the Reich's final ambitions merged with its most irrational dreams. By the end of the war, thousands of prisoners were dead, the tunnels incomplete, and the secrets buried. But the echo of that obsession, the hunger for hidden power, still lingers. Because maybe in some way that's what Riese was really about. Not just building something to hide from bombs, but building a myth that would outlive defeat. In the next part, we uncover what happened after the war, how the myths of Riese evolved, from whispers of hidden treasures to claims of Nazi gold trains, secret documents, and lost technologies still buried in the mountains. By 1944, the Nazi war effort was collapsing, yet deep underground, in the hidden chambers of Project Riese, the work continued. It no longer seemed purely military. The engineering was too intricate, the secrecy too absolute. Even for a regime built on control, something about Riese felt different, like it was serving not just strategy, but belief. To understand why, you have to look at the strange obsession that gripped parts of the Nazi elite, an obsession with the mystical, the ancient, and the occult. This wasn't myth or rumor. It was fact. The Nazi leadership had entire departments devoted to it. The most notorious was the Ananba, founded by Heinrich Himmler in 1935. Officially, it was an institute for cultural research, studying Germanic history and heritage. In reality, it was a hybrid of archaeology, pseudoscience, and mysticism, tasked with proving the racial and mythological superiority of the so-called Aryan people. The Ananba sent expeditions across the world, from Tibet to the Arctic, in search of evidence of an ancient, advanced civilization that predated all others. They hunted for sacred relics, ancient texts, and lost technologies. They believed that somewhere in humanity's forgotten past lay the origins of power, a power that could be harnessed again. And when the war began to turn against them, those beliefs became desperation. By late 1943, Himmler's organization had started moving research operations underground, away from Allied bombers. Dozens of secret laboratories were established in mines and bunkers. Some of those sites are known, others remain undocumented. But several researchers have suggested that Project Riese may have hosted more than engineers and laborers. That deep beneath the mountains, something else was happening. Among the testimonies collected after the war are reports from Polish locals who claim to have seen strange crates being delivered at night, marked not with the usual military codes but with arcane symbols. Others recalled SS officers in black uniforms arriving by convoy, staying only briefly, then disappearing into the tunnels. When Soviet investigators entered the complex in 1945, they allegedly found storage rooms filled with geological samples, ancient maps, and documents written in Gothic script. Some were labeled Ananba. Those items vanished into Soviet custody and have never been seen again. Historians debate what this means. Was Project Riese connected to the Nazi occult movement, or was it simply another industrial complex that happened to share geography with their myths? The line between fact and legend blurs here. In post-war interviews, members of the Ananba spoke openly about their belief in the Vril, a supposed source of cosmic energy, described in 19th century fiction but adopted by Nazi mystics as something real. They believed Vril was the life force that powered the universe, and that ancient civilizations, perhaps in Atlantis or Hyperborea, had once harnessed it. Himmler, fascinated by these ideas, dreamed of rediscovering that lost energy, believing it could grant ultimate power. He surrounded himself with astrologers, runologists, and occult scientists. His SS castle at Wewelsburg, shaped like a spearhead, was designed as a temple to this belief system, complete with a Hall of the Dead where SS officers were to be honored like medieval knights. It sounds absurd now, almost cinematic, but to the men who commanded millions, it was deadly serious. They saw themselves as the heirs to an ancient order, and their war as a cosmic struggle. So when rumors began to spread that Project Riese had been linked to these ideas, it didn't seem impossible. The tunnels themselves seem almost ceremonial in places. Massive stone chambers shaped like vaults, perfect geometric corridors that serve no practical military purpose, patterns carved into walls that some claim resemble runic symbols. At Osovka, one section is nicknamed the Cathedral, an enormous hall with towering columns, its purpose completely unknown. Another chamber features a wide concrete platform, aligned precisely east to west, as if meant for some kind of ritual or presentation. Could these be remnants of construction design? Yes. But could they also have been intended for something symbolic? That's the question that has haunted historians for decades. In 2011, Polish archaeologists scanning parts of Riese with ground-penetrating radar detected voids, vast empty spaces deeper than any mapped tunnels. Some of them were perfectly symmetrical, almost architectural in layout, but excavation was impossible. The tunnels are unstable, flooded, and in some places, sealed by explosions. Whatever lies beneath remains untouched, a labyrinth beneath a labyrinth. Among locals, there's a darker legend that toward the end of the war, the SS conducted experiments in Riese, not on weapons, but on people. Whispers tell of prisoners taken into the tunnels and never seen again, of lights and sounds at night, of screams that echoed from deep within the mountains. There is no hard evidence for this, no documents, no photographs, but the testimonies are consistent, enough to keep the stories alive. What's certain is this: the SS viewed human life as expendable, and in their pursuit of control, whether scientific, military, or spiritual, they were willing to sacrifice anything. When the Soviets arrived, the SS had already destroyed most traces of whatever they were doing underground. But a few reports mention finding lead-lined rooms, unusual electrical wiring, and what may have been chemical storage tanks. No one has been able to confirm what they were used for. To this day, the Polish government classifies parts of Riese as restricted due to unknown hazards. Researchers who have explored the sealed sections speak of strange magnetic interference, sudden malfunctions of lights and cameras, and, most mysteriously, patches of ground that register minor radiation. It could all have logical explanations, remnants of wartime industry. But combined with the legends of the Ananba, the timing, and the sheer scale of secrecy, the story of Riese begins to feel like something more than a military project. Perhaps it was a convergence of engineering, ideology, and obsession, a place where science met superstition, where the Reich's final ambitions merged with its most irrational dreams. By the end of the war, thousands of prisoners were dead, the tunnels incomplete, and the secrets buried. But the echo of that obsession, the hunger for hidden power, still lingers. Because maybe, in some way, that's what Riese was really about. Not just building something to hide from bombs, but building a myth that would outlive defeat. In the next part, we uncover what happened after the war, how the myths of Riese evolved, from whispers of hidden treasures to claims of Nazi gold trains, secret documents, and lost technologies still buried in the mountains. When the war ended, the Third Reich collapsed in chaos. Armies scattered, cities burned, and an empire built on conquest dissolved into ashes and silence. But in that silence, in the dark forests of Lower Silesia, something remained unfinished. And from that void, one of Europe's greatest legends was born. It began with whispers. Stories passed from soldier to villager, from survivor to investigator, all pointing to the same rumor, that in the final days of the war, a German armored train vanished somewhere between Breslau, now Wrocław, and the Owl Mountains. A train said to be filled not with soldiers or weapons, but with treasure. Gold bars, jewels, priceless art, and entire archives of looted wealth taken from across occupied Europe. It became known simply as the Nazi Gold Train. The story first appeared in 1946, when local railway workers told Soviet officers about strange movements on the tracks near Wałbrzych. In April 1945, they claimed that one night, under heavy guard, a military convoy of freight cars entered a tunnel near the village of Lubiekov and was never seen again. The entrances, they said, were sealed with explosives shortly after, and the men who sealed them were executed. At first, no one believed it, but then the Soviets began conducting secret excavations. Heavy equipment appeared, entire sections of forest were cordoned off, and just like with Project Riese, the records vanished. When Poland regained control of the region after the war, they inherited more than ruins. They inherited a myth. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, treasure hunters began scouring the mountains, miners, soldiers, and fortune seekers, all searching for the same thing: the hidden train. Some claimed to have found entrances sealed behind tons of rock. Others swore they heard hollow echoes beneath the tracks, proof, they said, of tunnels buried below. But no train was ever found. Still, the legend refused to die. In the 1970s, the Polish Security Service, the SB, launched a classified operation, not to find the treasure, but to stop people from looking. Too many were getting hurt or disappearing into unstable tunnels. Too many were spreading stories about German ghosts and hidden technology. And yet, every few years, someone new would come forward, a witness, a map, a piece of evidence, reigniting the obsession. Then, in 2015, the world's attention returned to Wałbrzych. Two treasure hunters, a Pole and a German, announced that they had used ground-penetrating radar to locate a 98-meter-long object buried beneath a hillside near kilometer 65 of the Wrocław-Wałbrzych railway line. The radar image showed a long, metallic shape with what appeared to be gun turrets. The hunters claimed it was the lost Nazi gold train. The news exploded across the globe. Television crews, journalists, and government officials descended on the quiet region. The Polish military even sent in engineers to investigate. For a few brief weeks, it seemed like one of the greatest mysteries of World War II was about to be solved. But when the excavation began, nothing. No tracks, no tunnel, no train. The story faded, but not entirely, because the radar had shown something. Even though official reports claimed the anomaly was natural geological formations, some of the engineers involved later admitted that what they saw didn't look natural at all. To this day, the raw data from that scan remains sealed. The legend had survived again. Part of the reason it endures is because it fits the pattern of the war's final months. By early 1945, the Nazi regime was evacuating treasures from every corner of Europe: gold from banks, paintings from museums, even private collections from families who had been deported to camps. Thousands of crates vanished in transit. Many were indeed buried, hidden, or destroyed before they could be captured. In the chaos of retreat, trains disappeared without record. It's entirely possible that one of them, or several, ended up somewhere in the Owl Mountains near the tunnels of Project Riese. After all, the region was already heavily fortified. The Nazis had the manpower, the equipment, and the motive, and they had the perfect hiding place. Modern historians have tried to separate fact from fiction. Archival evidence suggests that trains carrying valuables from Wrocław did exist. One document from April 1945 records the departure of a special transport headed southwest, destination unknown. Its cargo was listed only as secured assets of the Reichsbank. No arrival record has ever been found. So where did it go? Some say the train reached the tunnels and was sealed inside before the Soviets arrived. Others believe it never made it that far, that it was destroyed or looted by retreating German units. And then there's the theory that the train wasn't a train at all, but a metaphor for something else. According to this version, the gold wasn't literal. It referred to scientific data, the Reich's most valuable possession: blueprints for secret weapons, experimental research, and technology that would later form the foundation of Cold War science. After all, both the Americans and Soviets were racing to capture German scientists. Projects like Operation Paperclip proved that much of modern aerospace and missile research came directly from the remnants of the Reich. So what if Project Riese wasn't hiding treasure, but knowledge? If that's true, then the gold train may not have vanished. It may have been taken. The Soviets certainly behaved as if they'd found something worth hiding. They sealed the tunnels, confiscated documents, removed equipment in secrecy, and in their official statements, nothing. Even today, Polish historians are divided. Some see the legend as folklore born of post-war trauma. Others believe it's a coded clue, a fragment of truth buried beneath decades of fear and propaganda. What makes it haunting is that every generation rediscovers the same obsession. Every decade brings new explorers, new theories, new technology. And still, the mountains stay silent. Visitors to the region often describe the same feeling, standing at the mouth of a tunnel, peering into the darkness, hearing water drip from the ceiling, and wondering if somewhere beyond that last turn, something is waiting. Maybe a rusted locomotive, maybe empty air, maybe the ghosts of the men who built it. Whatever it is, the legend of the gold train has outlived the war, the regime, and the men who began it. It's no longer just about gold or treasure. It's about the human need to believe that secrets still exist, that something vast and hidden still lies beneath our feet, waiting to be found. And in the Owl Mountains of Poland, that belief still breathes. Because myths, like tunnels, don't die. They just go deeper. 70 years after the fall of the Third Reich, the Owl Mountains are no longer a battlefield, but they remain haunted ground. Tourists come for the history, explorers come for the mystery, and scientists, they come for the truth. Because beneath the forests and rivers of Lower Silesia, the mountain still hides something. Something vast, something built to last. In the 21st century, Project Riese has become one of the most studied underground structures in Europe. Engineers, archaeologists, and geophysicists have spent decades trying to map its full extent. Yet despite radar, drones, and digital imaging, the complete network has never been revealed. What we can see, the open sections at Osovka, Włodarz, Sobon, and Jugovic, is only a fraction of what once existed. Each tunnel stretches hundreds of meters into the rock, reinforced with concrete so dense that modern equipment struggles to penetrate it. The deeper you go, the clearer it becomes. This was not random construction. It was planned, organized, almost architectural in its intent. And that's exactly what makes it so disturbing. Between 1994 and 2010, a series of Polish geological surveys attempted to chart the full scope of the underground network. Using seismic reflection and ground-penetrating radar, they detected unmapped cavities, some tens of meters below known tunnels, others running parallel but inaccessible. Several of these voids were perfectly symmetrical, rectangular, smooth, and aligned with the existing complexes. Engineers described them as anomalies inconsistent with natural formation. But when teams attempted to drill into them, something strange happened. Their equipment failed, boreholes collapsed. In one case, pressure sensors registered sudden bursts of heat, as if the rock itself was reacting. Officially, the results were inconclusive. Unofficially, one of the engineers later claimed they were told to stop. That further excavation in certain areas was not authorized. No one knows who gave that order. In 2006, a Polish military historian named Tadeusz Słowikowski, who had spent decades collecting documents on Riese, published a report claiming that parts of the complex were deliberately sealed by Soviet forces in 1947. According to his findings, the Soviets filled several tunnels with concrete, not to preserve them, but to hide whatever lay inside. The locations he identified matched some of the same areas now showing radar anomalies. When the report surfaced, it caused an uproar. Government officials denied any knowledge of Soviet sealing operations, but former residents of the area remembered the noise, the sound of explosions in the mountains at night, long after the war had ended. Słowikowski's notes also mentioned something even stranger. He referenced a Soviet file, supposedly classified top secret, describing the removal of experimental materials and scientific cargo from the Owl Mountains in 1946. That file has never been found, and every attempt to locate it in Russian archives has been blocked. For many, that was proof that Riese was more than just an unfinished bunker. It was a vault. In 2012, a German research group conducted an independent scan of the Włodarz tunnels. They detected what appeared to be a second level, a vast space directly below the accessible one. Acoustic readings suggested it might be filled with water. Attempts to drain or drill toward it failed. Shortly afterward, the funding for the project was cut without explanation. Those who worked on the scans described the findings as deeply unsettling. One technician told a Polish newspaper, "It's as if the mountain doesn't want to be opened." The mystery only deepened when in 2017, a group of divers exploring a flooded shaft at Osovka discovered a steel gate 20 meters underwater. Behind it, sonar indicated a hollow space, at least 40 meters long. Attempts to cut through the gate were abandoned after air bubbles rose from below, carrying traces of oil and chemicals. The team withdrew. The shaft was resealed. Today, parts of Riese remain inaccessible not because of politics, but because of nature itself. Flooding, collapses, toxic gases, and unstable structures make further exploration dangerous. Yet the fascination persists. Every year, new explorers arrive, armed with cameras, Geiger counters, and hope. They search for clues, pieces of machinery, fragments of documents, anything that might explain what the Nazis were really building here. And sometimes they find things that don't belong, like the piece of metal tubing discovered in 2019, alloyed with elements not used in known wartime industries, or the electrical components found fused into the rock as if they'd been subjected to immense heat. Nothing conclusive, but enough to suggest that something happened here that ordinary records can't explain. Then there are the shadows, the things that can't be measured by science. Guides who spend their lives leading tours through Riese often speak quietly about what they've seen. Flashlights flickering for no reason, sudden drops in temperature, footsteps echoing when no one is behind you. Some dismiss it as superstition, the natural eeriness of an underground world built by suffering and death. But others feel it's something else, the weight of history itself, or perhaps the memory of the thousands who died constructing this labyrinth, their bodies still entombed within its walls. One Polish historian once said, "Riese is not just a place, it's a wound," and maybe that's why it resists being uncovered, because beneath the layers of myth and metal, there's something more human here, the story of ambition, cruelty, and a desperate belief in control that turned into madness. Even today, researchers argue about whether we should keep digging. Some say it's our duty to uncover the truth no matter how deep it lies. Others believe that certain doors were sealed for a reason, and maybe, just maybe, opening them comes with a cost. Because the mountain remembers, and every time we break into its heart, it whispers back. In the final chapter, we'll bring it all together, the history, the myth, the obsession, and ask the question no one can answer. What was Project Riese really for? The story of Project Riese doesn't end with discovery. It ends, as all great mysteries do, with questions that refuse to die. Decades have passed since the tunnels fell silent, but the mountain has never truly slept. Every year, new explorers descend into its darkness, armed with better tools, sharper cameras, and the same impossible hope that this time they'll find the answer. And yet, the truth still hides behind stone and silence. So what was Project Riese really for? To understand that, we have to return to the beginning, to what the Reich feared most in 1944. The Allies were closing in from the west, the Soviets were pushing from the east, Berlin was crumbling, and yet deep beneath the Owl Mountains, construction was accelerating. Thousands of prisoners were still being shipped in from camps like Gross Rosen. Supplies were arriving from across Europe. Blueprints were being drawn up for facilities that on paper had no official function. Whatever Riese was meant to be, it was important enough to finish, even when the war was already lost. Historians have spent 70 years offering explanations. Some say it was intended as a last refuge, a new Führer headquarters, perhaps even a government in exile. Others believe it was to be an underground industrial city, protected from bombing. But those explanations fail to fit the evidence. The scale is too vast, the infrastructure too advanced for a project with no clear logistical connection. And then there's the secrecy, the missing documents, the sudden Soviet intervention, the sealed tunnels. None of it adds up, which brings us to the final theory, the one that sits at the intersection of science, myth, and power. In the 1990s, a declassified Allied report mentioned a phrase that had appeared in intercepted German communications, Project Kronos. The file gave no details, only that it was research of strategic value involving advanced physics. Kronos, the Greek word for time. Some researchers believe this referred to experimental work on high-energy particle research or advanced propulsion, possibly an early attempt at what we now know as electromagnetic or anti-gravity studies. These experiments required isolation, shielding, and enormous power, the kind of environment that could only exist underground. It's not proof, but it's enough to suggest that Project Riese might have been connected to the Reich's rumored secret weapons programs, the so-called Wunderwaffe. Documents recovered from Dresden and Peenemünde confirm that Nazi scientists were experimenting with exotic energy devices, advanced radar, and even projects designed to manipulate gravity. The Allies took this research seriously enough to pursue it themselves after the war. Many of those same scientists were recruited under Operation Paperclip and went on to shape the foundations of modern aerospace, nuclear, and propulsion research. So the question remains, was Riese part of that chain? If the Soviets found anything beneath those mountains, equipment, research, or personnel, it would explain the veil of secrecy that still surrounds the site today. It would also explain why excavation is discouraged and why the area remains one of the most heavily restricted archaeological zones in Poland. There's also the matter of the radiation anomalies recorded near Osovka and Wodarz, low-level but consistent, unexplained by natural sources, and the fragments of unusual alloys found embedded in the rock, the same kind once theorized for magnetic containment devices. If you listen to the skeptics, they'll tell you it's nonsense, a conspiracy built from coincidence. But if you look closely at the historical record, the timeline, and the sheer precision of Riese's construction, it's hard not to wonder if something extraordinary was happening there, something that even today we barely understand. Perhaps it was technology far ahead of its time, or perhaps it was just the delusion of men so desperate for control that they turned to myth when science failed them. The truth is buried in the same tunnels as the bodies of those who built it. And maybe that's why no one can find it, because uncovering the full truth of Riese would mean facing what humanity is capable of when obsession overrides reason. What remains today are empty corridors echoing with the past, concrete walls covered in moss, flooded shafts where the light dies after a few meters, a labyrinth carved by men chasing immortality and consumed by it. Stand at the entrance of one of those tunnels and you'll understand why Riese endures. It isn't just a relic of war. It's a symbol of what happens when power, secrecy, and belief combine, when people build monuments not to life, but to their own myth. And maybe that's why it still calls to us, because deep down, we're still searching for the same thing the Reich was, the hope that somewhere, hidden beneath all the darkness, there's a secret that changes everything. But maybe the real secret of Project Riese is that there was never a single answer. Just layers, history, horror, ambition, and myth, all fused together beneath the earth. And like the tunnels themselves, the deeper you go, the darker it gets.